Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about perspective. If you missed this lesson, this will be a quick overview, and at the end there will be a video that shows some really good ways to draw perspective. So if you're wondering what perspective is, basically it's the ability to draw things in 3-dimension looking realistic. We used to always do this just simply by drawing a square and then kind of drawing another square behind it and then connecting those with lines. And that is, again, sort of the left brain way of thinking about 3 dimensions. But the fact of the matter is that because we have binocular vision, meaning 2 eyes, we take in information from 2 sources that come in, and our brain puts those together. And when our brain puts those things together, it creates an illusion of perspective. So we're going to look at that, and I'm going to show you how to draw that. But to start, we're going to talk about some different vocabulary that we need to know right at the outset. So first, we're going to talk about parallel lines and perpendicular lines. Now, you guys probably all remember this from geometry. Parallel lines are 2 lines that run side by side and never touch. Perpendicular lines are 2 lines that cross or intersect at a 90-degree angle. So those are the 2 types of lines that we're going to be dealing with. Oftentimes you can think about those as horizontal lines and vertical lines. The horizontal line leads us into what we're calling the horizon line. So the horizon line is, you can think of that as where the sky and the land meet typically, but it could just be sort of a dividing line, kind of where the viewer's eye is going if you're in a room or something. A vanishing point is a point on that line, usually where the viewer is looking, and converging lines are lines that all come together at the vanishing point. We're going to talk specifically about 1-point perspective today, but we also will touch on 2- and 3-point perspective. So let's look at this picture. We know that this sign is farther away than this sign, right? It's obvious. We all know that. But how do we know that? There are certain visual cues that we all take for granted that we don't really think about. Number 1, this sign is smaller than this sign. Now we know in real life those 2 signs are probably similarly sized, but because this one is farther away, it appears to be smaller. The other visual cue that we have is that this sign is higher in the picture plane than this one, right? We know that that's not a tiny little sign floating in the air. We know, because it's smaller and because it's higher in the picture plane, that it is actually farther away. Now those things seem very obvious, but some of the most obvious things we don't actually really ever think about what it is that tells us that or why. In this picture we can see the vocabulary we talked about before. We see the horizon line, right? That's where the ground and the sky meet. We see the vanishing point, which is where the camera was pointing, where the viewer was looking. And we see converging lines. These are these natural lines that lead into the distance, lead towards that vanishing point. Right? You can see them in the road, you can see them in the ditch, you can see them, even in a sense, you can almost see them in the line of the 2 signs, the tops of the 2 signs. Let's look in a room now where it's less obvious where the horizon line and the vanishing point might lie. When you look at this, some people would think, oh, the horizon line is probably right on the floor. Other people look at this large horizontal feature right in the middle. But think about where the lines, the natural lines in the picture are leading. Look at, there's a line right here of these chairs. There's another line right here of these chairs. There are also lines in the ceiling. See these lines? All these lines are leading to one spot. That spot, right in the middle of this podium, that is the vanishing point. That's where the viewer was looking, that's where the camera was pointed, and that's where all the lines in the building come to converge. All right, so that's horizon line, vanishing point, and converging lines. Now, how do we use those? Well, you can see here Vincent van Gogh used them to show realistic looking dimension within this bedroom that he painted. You can see it in the bed, you can see it in the line of the pictures, you can see it in the line of the chair's feet. And this is going to be similar to what I'm going to ask you to do. Most commonly, you will see this in drawings of like city scenes, scenes like this where you can actually use all the vertical and horizontal lines to your benefit. Now this looks really complicated, but in reality there's only three kinds of lines here. There are horizontal lines, there are vertical lines, and there are converging lines. Okay, any line that is vertical, going up and down in this picture, is going to be straight up and down vertical. No angle to it, no leaning, no nothing. So any line that goes up will just be a simple straight up and down line. Even these lines here on the ground, they're all straight up and down. Any line that is not straight up and down, so any line that is on a front face of a building, so here, 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 those are all going to be horizontal this way. They are all going to run parallel to the horizon line, or even you can think about parallel to the edge of your paper. And then the only other kind of line are these lines that are going away from us. All these lines that are going away. Those lines are all converging lines, and they will all go towards the vanishing point. So any line that was horizontal, or would be horizontal if you were standing right in front of it, but is not because you're spacing a different way, those lines all have to angle towards the vanishing point. And that's pretty much it. A drawing like this is not hard to do if you are patient and you are careful and you use a ruler. You can do something like this. Now, this is an example of what's called two-point perspective. And I'm not going to ask anybody to do two-point perspective unless you just want to, but two-point perspective is very similar to one-point perspective. There is a horizon line, but in this case there are 2 points, and you always see two-point perspective when you are looking at the corner of something. You're not always facing something straight on. So two-point perspective drawings are also look complicated, but they are not that complicated. In reality, there are only vertical lines and converging lines in a two-point perspective drawing because all the horizontal lines are going away from you. So that's pretty much how that is done. This is an example of three-point perspective, which is pretty complicated and can achieve real drama. You can have a really dramatic picture this way. Usually you might imagine things jutting up and towards you and having a lot of movement in it. But it is a complicated style of drawing that requires a lot of concentration and a lot of organization of your lines. Here we see a picture by M.C. Escher that exemplifies three-point perspective. Escher was a Swiss mathematician who was a genius at drawing in perspective and would do all kinds of things to trick his viewers. Like, for example, if you look at this staircase, which is continually going up and up, it's an infinitely up staircase, or I guess it's an infinitely down staircase if you're the guy on the inside row. So it's really a tricky thing. Back to this drawing now. This is a typical cityscape. You could also do something that had trees, and I show this to show that not everything has to be quite so antiseptic, like that last picture where there was nothing organic or living. You can do the same thing with trees. You can see they have a general line that heads to the vanishing point, even though all trees aren't the same size. But they still are getting smaller and getting higher in the picture plane as they go towards the vanishing point. One thing you need to keep in mind about any repeating element in a drawing like this, they will always get closer together and smaller, of course, smaller as they get farther away, but they also get closer together. So anything like road lines, sidewalk lines, fence posts, trees. This one was actually not drawn great because the distance between these two trees and the distance between these two trees is not that different, but they should be much closer together, and then at the end you can barely even tell the difference between them at all. This is an example to show that your perspective on the perspective drawing does not always have to be the straightforward horizon line across the center. This person drew their horizon line at an angle. Well, as long as you keep following the rules, which means all the vertical lines, vertical in this sense, meaning they are the up and down lines even though they are angled, they all have to remain perpendicular to the horizon line. But as long as they do, then you're able to keep the rules, follow the rules, and everything works out. So just because it got angled and turned doesn't mean that that's wrong. And finally, here's a picture to show how shading can be used to enhance a perspective drawing. Alright, so after this I'm going to also post a link to a video that has a really great example and explanation of drawing in perspective. Your assignment is going to be to draw 6 small simple shapes surrounding a vanishing point, single vanishing point, and then those drawings need to be in 3-dimension properly using the converging lines and with a ruler. If you watch the video, the guy shows you a great way to do it. He does a lot of erasing, so if you figure out what he's doing, then you can figure out how to draw those same shapes without doing all the erasing that he does, but that's okay. It's a good way to start. So after you do your 6 small shapes, then you are going to do a full page drawing in perspective. So you may decide you want to do a city, you may decide you want to do a railroad tracks or a road. It's up to you. You can do something from a photograph, you can do something from your own head. That's really up to you. But I want a full page, fully finished, using shading like we've talked about. I want it to look nice and done. It's going to be worth a little bit more than some of the other assignments because we're kind of getting into bigger drawing assignments. Alright, have fun. Make sure you turn in the quiz on Canvas, and I look forward to seeing your drawings.